The bell over the door of Thorpe's Comics and Games didn't ring very often. Grayson could count the customers on weekdays, but it didn't bother him. He loved the quiet morning hours when the sun slanted through the window, illuminating the racks of neatly arranged comic books. It was at times like these that he laid out the new arrivals, dusted the shelves, and reread his favorite issues. He'd gotten the store from an uncle who'd suddenly decided to move to Florida. Grayson, who was still working in the delivery service at the time, took out a loan and bought the business. His mother, of course, was against it. Real estate seemed to her much more reliable business, but in 3 years he not only paid off the bank, but also expanded the assortment of board games. That morning he was preparing for his weekly arcade. The small table in the corner had been wiped down, the coffee maker washed, the cookies arranged on plates. Habitual Saturday visitors were gathering by 2 o'clock in the afternoon to play Dungeons and Dragons. The ringing of the bell caught him laying out the new manga releases. A tall girl with long red hair gathered in a careless bun entered the store. She was wearing a simple denim dress and leather jacket and holding a tattered notebook. "Good morning." Her voice was low, velvety. "I'm told you have the best manga collection in town." Grayson came down the stairs. "Technically, we're the only comic book store in Ravenwood, so there's not much competition." She smiled, and he noticed a slight asymmetry in that smile. The right corner of her lips lifted just above the left. "I'm Blair. Recently got a job at the Pink Flamingo, that's—" "I know," Grayson replied quickly. The adult store at the other end of Main Street was a proverb. "I'm Grayson Thorpe. What exactly are you interested in?" "Looking for boys' love-style manga for our store. We have a comic book section, but the selection is not so good." They spent the next hour discussing Japanese manga, with Blair proving to be a true connoisseur of the genre. She wrote out the titles, talking about her favorite series, and Grayson found himself admiring her gestures, smooth, a little theatrical. "We also have a manga club on Thursdays," he said, packing up the selected titles. "Not a lot of people lately, though. Maybe we should join forces." Blair pulled out a business card. "Give me a call. We can discuss cross-promo. I think our audiences overlap." When she left, Grayson stared at the business card for another long moment. "Blair Cassidy, purchasing manager," the inscription read. The day was definitely getting more interesting. Toward evening, her mother stopped by the store. Whitney Thorpe, the city's chief realtor, felt it her duty to check on her son's progress. She looked around the place with her usual appraising gaze. "There's dust on the top shelves again," she remarked in lieu of a greeting. "And when will you finally hire an assistant? You can't do it alone." "Mom, we've discussed this before. The business is small, the profits don't allow for it." "I talked to Michael at the bank. He's willing to consider an expansion loan if you finally do something more serious than comic books." Grayson shook his head. It was useless to argue with his mother. She genuinely didn't understand how anyone could willingly trade a career in the real estate business for a trade in pictures. Closing up store that evening, he took out Blair's card again. In a small town where everyone knew each other, the arrival of a new person always sparked interest. And Blair was definitely unusual, sharp-tongued, well-read, with that asymmetrical smile of hers. The bell jingled one last time as Grayson locked the door. Ravenwood's main street was quieting down. The stores were closing. The rare passers-by were hurrying home. Somewhere in the distance, a truck whizzed by, the siren of a fire truck blaring. Just an ordinary evening in a small town where nothing ever happens. Grayson didn't yet know that this day would be the beginning of a story that would forever change not only his life, but all of sleepy Ravenwood. Thursday manga fan meetings had suddenly gotten a second wind, and Blair had brought a few of the Pink Flamingo regulars with her, and now there were at least 10 people at Grayson's store each week. They discussed new releases, argued about translations, and drank green tea from thermoses. Grayson found himself looking forward to these meetings. Blair had a knack for storytelling. She spoke softly, paused, gestured in a way that made everyone swoon. She knew Japanese and sometimes read passages in the original, explaining the nuances of the translation. One day after the meeting, they stayed up late, sorting through the new arrivals. Blair sorted the manga into genres, and Grayson watched her hands with their neat, pastel-colored manicures. "You know, It's not like I got a job at Flamingo right away, she said abruptly. Worked at a library in Seattle. It was easier to get lost in the crowd there. Here, everybody knows everybody. And what do you think of our little town? It's funny to watch people's reactions. Some pretend not to notice me. Some say hello defiantly. The kids just stare, they're allowed. She grinned. And some people come into the store just to stare at me, disguised as buying lotion. There was no bitterness in her voice, just a calm statement of fact. Grayson remained silent, not knowing what to say in response. You're not asking, Blair observed. About what? About me. Usually people start asking after the third meeting. It's none of my business. She nodded. Thanks. A week later, Blair invited him to dinner. They sat at a small Thai restaurant, the only decent place in town, and Blair talked about his childhood in Seattle, his trucker brother, how he'd realized who she really was. Rick was the only one who supported me right away. She stirred the noodles in the cooled soup. The parents, they took time, a lot of time, and Rick just said, "Okay, sis, I'm for you now." Grayson imagined what it would be like to be the older brother, to see the younger one change and just accept it. Speaking of Rick, he's supposed to stop by the other day. Blair pushed his plate away. Want to meet him? They met at the diner by the gas station. Rick appeared tall, broad-shouldered, with sunburned hair and a weathered face. He shook Grayson's hand firmly and ordered a triple helping of fries. "So you sell comic books," he said with his mouth full. "Profitable business?" "Not that, Rick," Blair said cautiously. "Come on, sis, I have to make sure you're in good hands." "I'm in my own hands," she retorted. Rick grinned. "Whatever you say, but if anything, I pass through here every month." Grayson heard an odd intonation in his voice, either a warning or a threat. He could have made it up, though. After all, what could be more natural than an older brother's concern? By summer, he and Blair were spending almost all their free time together. Visitors to the store were used to seeing her behind the counter. She helped with cataloging and could talk for hours about rare editions. Some regular customers stopped coming in, but new ones appeared. Whitney, meeting her son at the supermarket, pursed her lips. "Are you sure this is good for business?" "Mom, sales are up 20%. "I'm not talking about sales." Grayson remained silent. He'd learned to let his mother's comments pass his ears, as well as the whispers behind his back and the leering glances from some of the townspeople. The important thing was that Blair smiled his asymmetrical smile when he brought her coffee in the morning, and that smile was worth all the small-town gossip. The store closed earlier than usual that day. Grayson arranged the candles between the racks, turned on the garlands, and checked the small box in his pocket for the 100th time. Blair should be here any minute. He'd sent her a text asking for help sorting through the new arrival of manga. The last few months had flown by like a day. They'd learned to understand each other half-heartedly, to laugh at the same jokes, to be silent together. In the mornings, Blair brought croissants from the bakery across from the Flamingo, and in the evenings they strolled along the waterfront, making up stories about the rare passers-by. A bell jingled. Blair froze on the threshold, looking around the candle-lit store. "Is this a new promotion?" She walked between the racks, touching the spines of books with her fingers. "Romantic candlelight reading?" Grayson pulled out a box. He'd been picking out a ring for a month, a simple platinum one with a small sapphire. Blair didn't like flashy jewelry. "I've been practicing the speech," he said, dropping to one knee. "Wrote 3 versions, but now I realize that all the words have gone somewhere." She looked at him with widened eyes. Her red hair glinted gold in the candlelight. "You are the most amazing person I've ever met. You taught me to see beauty in imperfection, to find strength in vulnerability, and to never apologize for who you are. Blair Cassidy, will you marry me?" She was silent for so long he started to panic, then sank to the floor beside him. "You realize this isn't going to be easy?" Her voice trembled. "People will talk." "Let them talk. Your mother, it's not her life. What about the store? You've put so much into it." "Fuck the store. We can start over, anywhere, even Seattle." She ran her finger down his cheek, wiping away a tear he hadn't even noticed. "Yes," she said simply. "Of course you are." The news spread through the city in a matter of hours. Whitney rushed to the store the next morning. "This is crazy," She paced the room. "You can't do this. What will people say? How will you run the business? Who will come to the store after this?" "Mom, I'm selling the store." She stopped. "What?" "We're moving to Seattle. There are more opportunities there, and it'll be easier for Blair." "You're crazy." Whitney sank into a chair. "All those years of work, the loan you've been paying off. And for what? For some whim?" "It's not a whim. I love her." "Him," Whitney cut him off. "You can't love it. It's unnatural." "Think what you want." He turned back to the shelves. "The wedding is in a month. You're invited." She left, slamming the door so that the bell rang. Rick arrived a week later. He looked gaunt, shadows under his eyes. "So it's a wedding." He sat in the cafe across from Grayson. "That was fast. What's the holdup?" "And you're selling the store?" "Yeah, got a couple buyers." Rick drummed his fingers on the table. "You know, I've always been protective of Blair, always been on her side, but sometimes I think that indulging in all this has only made it worse." "Indulging?" Grayson tensed. "You're talking about your sister." "I'm talking about a brother who decided he could be someone else," Rick pitched forward. "And about you making things worse by encouraging that fantasy." "I think you should go," Grayson said quietly. "Yeah, it's time." Rick stood up. "But I'll be back again. I have a regular itinerary, remember?" He started showing up more often, either supposedly passing by chance or bringing Blair some change from the flights. Each time, he struck up a conversation about the wedding, about moving, about them being in a hurry. "He's worried," Blair said. "It'll pass." But Grayson could see her tense up at the sound of a truck outside, the flinch of the phone ringing. They'd set a wedding date for late summer. The store had been sold to a young couple from a neighboring town who planned to turn it into a book club. Grayson had already looked at a space in Seattle near the university campus, the perfect place for a comic book store. Blair had quit her job at the Flamingo. In the evenings, they sat among the boxes of books and made plans about the new store, about the little apartment overlooking the bay, about how they would walk along the Seattle waterfront, making up stories about passers-by. Whitney never showed up at the store again. Rick called every day, and Blair answered his calls less and less frequently, and the whispers in town continued. About love gone wrong, about God's punishment, about everything having a limit. But Grayson and Blair weren't listening. They packed their books, placed candles on the windowsills, and kissed under the light of garlands hung between half-empty shelves. The wedding took place in a city park. The August sun shone through the leaves of the old maples, creating a whimsical pattern on Blair's white dress. There weren't many guests, a few friends from the book club, a couple of regulars from both stores, Rick, and to the surprise of many, Whitney, who was standing nearby by the fountain. Blair had chosen a simple dress with no unnecessary jewelry. Her red hair was gathered into an elegant bun, and she was holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Grayson wore a dark blue suit and his favorite tie with anime characters, the only tribute to their shared passion. The ceremony was short. The elderly officiant, who had known the Thorpe family for years, stammered while reciting the text, but did a decent job. When the newlyweds exchanged rings, Rick suddenly stood up and headed for the exit of the park, but halfway stopped, stood for a minute, and returned. At a small buffet at a local restaurant, he drank more than usual. Blair tried to talk to him several times, but he waved him off, looking somewhere past his sister. "Forgive him," Blair whispered to her husband. "He never drinks that much. He's probably stressed out about the move." Whitney approached them near the end of the evening. She looked aged, as if she'd drained herself over the month. "I still think you're making a mistake," she told her son. "But you're my only child, and I'll try to accept your choices." She held out an envelope. There was a check for a large sum. "For the new store." Grayson hugged his mother, feeling her shudder with held-back tears. After the buffet, the newlyweds planned to go straight to their wedding trip, a week in a small motel on the coast. Rick volunteered to give them a ride to the place. "It's my route that way anyway." "No need," Grayson started to say, but Blair squeezed his hand. "Let him drive. It's important to him." The drive took 3 hours. Rick was silent the whole way, only occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror. At the motel, he helped unload the suitcases, hugged his sister awkwardly, and drove away without even saying goodbye to Grayson. The motel was exactly as it appeared in the pictures, small, cozy, overlooking the ocean. Their room smelled of fresh linens and sea salt. Blair immediately opened the window, letting in the cool evening breeze. Finally, just the two of us, she snuggled up to her husband. No whispers behind our backs, no judgmental glances. In the evening, they walked along the beach. The sand was cooling after a hot day. The waves rolled lazily onto the shore. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of a lighthouse flickered. The next day, Grayson spotted a familiar truck in the motel parking lot. He didn't say anything to Blair, but he began to look more closely at the cars passing by. They spent their days on the beach, reading manga and making up stories about the rare tourists. In the evenings, they ate dinner at a local restaurant overlooking the sunset. Blair was glowing with happiness, but sometimes Grayson caught her worried look when big cars drove by. On the third day, the receptionist handed them a note. "Take care of her. She's all I have." The handwriting was uneven, as if written in a hurry. "Is Rick here?" Blair asked, crumpling the note. "Probably just passing through," Grayson lied. He didn't bother telling her about the truck in the parking lot. That evening, while Blair was showering, he went out on the balcony to smoke, a habit he couldn't seem to break. In the lamplight, he thought he saw a familiar figure flicker by the edge of the parking lot, but when he looked closer, there was no one there. "Is everything okay?" Blair hugged him from behind, wet hair chilling his neck. "Sure," he put out his cigarette. "Just admiring the stars." They went back to the room, locked the door, and pulled the curtains. Somewhere in the darkness of the parking lot, a truck engine rumbled, but the lovers paid no attention to it. They were too busy with each other on this special night of their honeymoon. By the end of the week, they'd nearly exhausted the supply of comic books they'd brought with them. Blair had caught a cold after her evening swim, and Grayson had insisted that she stay in her room under a blanket with hot tea while he went to a nearby diner for dinner. It was a chilly evening. The ocean breeze was chilling, and Grayson pulled up the collar of his jacket. The diner had a neon sign that read, "Joe's," and the half-empty room smelled of coffee and fries. He ordered and settled by the window, leafing through the manga he'd brought along to read. A salt and pepper shaker trembled on the table as heavy trucks passed by, heading for the port warehouses. "Didn't expect to see you here." Grayson looked up. Rick looked gaunt, stubble growing into an unkempt beard, shadows under his eyes. "May I sit down?" Without waiting for an answer, he sank heavily into the creaking chair. He smelled of road, fatigue, and something else. Grayson didn't immediately realize it was whiskey. "How is she?" "Got a little cold. Nothing serious." Rick nodded, examining his hands. His knuckles were bunched up, dirt blackened under his fingernails. "You know," he spoke softly, almost a whisper, "I've really been trying to understand, haven't I? All these years. Told myself the main thing was to be happy. I was happy," he corrected himself. "But sometimes I wake up at night and see him, Brian, what he was like before all this." "Don't!" Grayson tried to get up, but Rick grabbed his sleeve. "Sit down, let's talk." There was a new note in his voice, something dark, dangerous. The waitress brought Grayson's order in a bag, but he didn't even glance in her direction. "You're taking her away, aren't you?" Rick continued. "To your own damn Seattle. You think it'll be easier there? You think the people are different? Let go." And I'm thinking, maybe if someone had stopped him back then, in the beginning, maybe things would have been different. Grayson pulled his sleeve up sharply. "Blair's waiting for dinner. I'll go." "Of course," Rick grinned crookedly. "Go to your fiancée. Wife. Hell, I don't even know how to say it right now so I don't offend anyone." Grayson stepped outside. The wind had picked up, and a thunderstorm was brewing in the distance. He quickened his pace, clutching the bag of food. Footsteps sounded behind him, heavy, uneven. "Hey, son-in-law!" Rick called out. "Wait a minute." Grayson didn't stop. He turned down an alley between a diner and an abandoned warehouse, a shortcut to the motel. "I really meant well, didn't I?" Rick's voice sounded very close. For everyone. The first blow came in the back of his head. Grayson dropped the bag, fries scattering to the wet asphalt. He barely felt the second blow. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. It began to rain, washing away the tracks from the asphalt. At the motel, Blair waited for her husband, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot tea. And in the dark alley, Rick stood over his brother-in-law's body, clutching a heavy wrench in his hand, and whispered, "I'm sorry, brother. It's better this way. It's better for everyone." The storm was getting worse. Night covered the city with a black blanket, hiding the secrets that Detective Merritt Dowd would uncover in the morning. Merritt Dowd arrived at the crime scene at 4 a.m. The body had been discovered by a homeless man seeking shelter from the rain in an alley. Forensics was already working under a temporary shelter, illuminating the pavement with spotlights. Grayson Thorpe, 32 years old, the lieutenant handed her a folder. Owner of a comic book store in Ravenwood, or rather former owner, recently sold the business, was here on a wedding trip. Dowd squatted down next to the body. Multiple blows with a heavy object to the head and upper back. The killer was clearly taller and stronger than the victim. Murder weapon? None found. Rain washed away most of the evidence. Next to the body was a soggy bag from the diner. On the pavement, soggy potato sticks that had almost turned to mush. Where's the wife? At the motel. Doesn't know yet. Dowd wrinkled her nose. Breaking news like this was the worst part of the job. Blair Thorpe opened the room door at once, as if she hadn't slept. There was fear and some kind of doom in her eyes, as if she'd been expecting something like this. "He's not back," she said in lieu of a greeting. "I called the police, but they asked me to wait 24 hours. Dowd broke the news softly. Blair didn't cry. She sat motionless, clutching the plaid in her hands. "Tell me about last night." "I caught a cold. Grayson went to get dinner. Said he'd be quick." She spoke in a monotone, looking at one point. "It's Rick, isn't it?" "Rick? My brother. He's been following us all week. Thought we didn't notice his truck in the parking lot." Dowd made a note in her notebook. "Why would he want to hurt your husband?" "Because he couldn't face it." Blair finally looked at the detective. "You know, he was the first one to accept me. When I started my transition, protected me from everyone, and then something broke." By noon, detectives had interviewed the entire motel staff. The receptionist remembered the note he'd passed to the newlyweds. A maid had seen a large truck parked at the far end of the parking lot for days. Thought locals at first. The lieutenant showed Dowd the new materials. There was a group of religious fanatics here, protesting same-sex marriage, but they all have alibis. "Check this Rick guy's route. Where's his truck now?" "Already on it. Transportation police are looking." Dowd went back to Blair's room. She was sitting by the window, still wrapped in her plaid. "What made you think of your brother right away?" "He changed after the wedding. Became obsessed with the idea that he could fix everything. Get me back to my old life. Like Grayson's death would change anything." "Did he have a drinking problem? Drugs?" "No. He was always the model big brother. Worked, helped his parents. Protected me." She grinned bitterly. "Even overprotective. Are you afraid of him?" "Now I am." There was a knock on the door. The lieutenant looked worried. "Found the truck, abandoned at a gas station 50 miles from here. There's a bloody wrench in the cab." Dowd nodded. "Put out an APB on Rick Cassidy. Priority top priority." Blair continued to stare out the window where the gray sky merged with the gray ocean. Somewhere out there, on the deserted roads, her brother was trying to escape from what he had done. But Merritt Dowd knew that such crimes do not go away. Sooner or later, the killer would make a mistake. In the meantime, she had to work, to collect evidence, to interview witnesses, to reconstruct the picture of that fateful night when hatred was stronger than love. The morning at the police station began with a review of the surveillance tapes. Merritt Dowd had spent the third hour staring at grainy black and white footage from Joe's diner. "The quality is terrible," she rubbed her tired eyes. "But even here you can tell. The conversation was intense." On the screen, Rick was holding Grayson by the sleeve, proving something heatedly to him. The timestamp showed 9 hours and 23 minutes past midnight. Interviewed the waitress. The lieutenant placed the statement folder on the table. Susan Parker works at the diner for 5 years. Says the suspect smelled of alcohol but was confident. Only ordered coffee. Dowd flipped through the statement. Susan noted that Rick had shown up at the diner on previous days, always sitting by the window, drinking coffee, watching the motel. The owner of the diner, Joe Martinez, added to the picture. He came in every night, sat for hours, muttering something to himself about mistakes, about fixing things. I didn't pay much attention. Not many strange people come in. There was a knock at the office. Blair stood on the threshold, pale but collected. Detective Dowd, I remembered something. Rick was talking about the old hunting cabin before the wedding, the place where we used to hide out when we were kids when Dad... Anyway, it's up in the mountains, near the Canadian border. Can you show me on a map? Yeah, but... Blair shook his head. He's not going to hide there. It's too obvious. Whitney Thorpe arrived by noon. Despite the tragedy, she held herself upright, only a small tremor in her hands giving away her condition. I have to help, she told Dowd. Maybe I've missed something, some sign. Tell me about your interaction with Rick Cassidy. He came by the agency a couple times. He was looking for a truck stop, had a unpleasant conversation. He never called Blair sister, just Brian or he. I was glad I wasn't the only one who thought that. Whitney covered her face with her hands. God, if I'd known. Did you notice anything suspicious about his behavior? He was too controlling. Asked about Grayson's plans, about the store. I thought he was just worried about his sister. Now I realize he was looking for clues, reasons to interfere with the wedding. Forensics came back this evening on the wrench found in the truck. The victim's blood, the killer's prints, all clean and obvious. Like he wanted to leave us clues, Dowd muttered, looking at the photos. The lieutenant brought new information. The gas station cameras had picked up Rick's truck heading north, but something about it was wrong, too obvious. He wants us to look for him there. Dowd set the photos aside. Send a team to check the cabin, but keep the main force here. He hasn't traveled far. How can you be so sure? Because he thinks he's right, and right has no reason to run. The phone rang on the table. It was a call from a roadside bar in the suburbs. The bartender claimed to have seen a man who looked like Rick Cassidy. Dowd sent uniforms to check it out. It was too early to get excited. Too many false calls had come in these days. But the work had to continue, methodically, step by step, until the killer made a mistake. Rick Cassidy was found in a church, a small wooden church on the outskirts of town. He sat in the last row with a battered Bible in his lap. He didn't resist arrest, only asked to be allowed to finish his prayer. He looked calm in the interrogation room. His beard was shaved, his clothes clean, as if he had prepared for this meeting on purpose. I knew you'd find me, he told Dowd. Just needed time to realize everything. Tell me what happened that night. I'd been following them all week, couldn't do otherwise, felt I had to be there for them. Protecting. He was quiet for a moment. You know, when Blair first said he was really a girl, I thought it would pass. All kids say that sometimes. But it didn't. No. And I was supportive. Protected him from his father, from ridicule. Thought. The main thing is that he was happy. Was happy. He grimaced, as if the words hurt physically. And then there was this Grayson. And I realized, all those years I'd just been indulging the disease. Dowd waited silently for the continuation. I wasn't planning a murder that night. I wanted to talk, to explain. But he was so confident, talking about the future, about the new store in Seattle, about how happy they'd be. Rick clenched his fists. And all I saw was him taking my little brother, taking him even farther away from a normal life. Is that why you took the wrench? It was always in the cab, for repairs. Rick ran his hand over his face. I caught up with him in the alley, wanted to just scare him, make him drive away. But when he turned around, he looked at me with such disdain, and I saw in his eyes everything I'd been fighting against for so many years. Blair walked into the room. Rick jerked, tried to get up, but the handcuffs held tight. Brian, my name is Blair. No, you're my brother, my little brother. I've been protecting you your whole life. You killed my husband. I saved you from this mistake. Blair shook his head. The only mistake you made, Rick. When you decided that love could be measured by conformity to your idea of normal. I loved you, love you, more than anyone. No, she cried for the first time since the investigation began. You loved the image of the little brother you saved from your father, who you could control, and when I grew up and became me, the real me, you couldn't stand it. Rick was thrashing around in handcuffs, yelling something about big brother duty, about protection, about sin. Blair looked at him with pity and infinite weariness. You know what the worst part is? She said, heading for the door. You actually believe you did the right thing, and you're going to believe it for the rest of your life. When she left, Rick fell silent, hunched over in his chair, aged about 10 years. I protected him, he muttered. All my life I've been protecting him. From what? Dowd asked quietly. From the world, from choice, from sin. He raised empty eyes to her. Now you can tell me everything in detail. About that evening, about the key, about washing my hands in the ocean. Dowd turned on the recorder. Ahead was a long evening of confessions from a man whose love had turned into an obsession and whose desire to protect into a need to control. A man who had never been able to accept that sometimes the best defense was to let the other person be themselves. The trial lasted 3 days. Rick Cassidy pleaded guilty, made no attempt to justify himself or ask for leniency. As the judge read the sentence, 25 years without parole, he looked only at his sister sitting in the front row. Blair didn't show up for the reading of the sentence. She was at the comic book store, sorting through the new arrivals of manga. After the funeral, she'd canceled the sale of the store, bought it back from the new owners. This is all I have left of it, she explained to Dowd when she stopped by to check on her. Every shelf here, every book holds his presence. The town was slowly returning to normal. The story of love and murder had become one of those legends told in a bar to visitors, lowering their voices. Some residents stopped coming into the store, others, on the contrary, started stopping by more often, silently leaving money for purchases, as if apologizing for what they had once condemned. Whitney showed up at the store a month after the trial. She stood at the entrance, looking at the display case, then pushed the door open with determination. I don't know anything about comic books, she said instead of greeting, but I know how to do bookkeeping, and I know how to work with banks. Blair looked up from the catalog. Why do you need this? Because you're the only thing left of my son. Whitney squared her shoulders. And because I'm to blame too. By my silence, by my judgment. I couldn't protect my son, but maybe I can help his wife. They started working together. Whitney handled the paperwork. Blair handled purchasing and customer relations. By Christmas, the store had expanded, adding a second floor with a cafe and meeting space for the book club. Dowd occasionally stopped in for coffee. She watched Blair talk to the teens about the new manga series, watched Whitney meticulously check the invoices, watched their relationship gradually warm from wary politeness to something akin to acceptance. Letters from Rick came every month. Blair put them in a desk drawer without printing them out. Whitney never asked about them, though she occasionally lingered her gaze on the puffy stack of envelopes. One evening, as she was closing up store, Blair discovered a box on the doorstep. Inside were old photos, her and Grayson on the day they met. Their first book club meeting, quiet evenings reading manga. Whitney had found them in a family album. I thought they should be here, she said. In a place where you were happy. The photos took up space on the wall of the cafe. People often stopped near them, gazing at the smiling couple among the bookshelves. Grayson and Blair's story was no longer gossip. It became a symbol that love could be different, that it had the right to exist in any form, that it didn't care about small-town prejudice. And the letters from Rick kept coming. In them, he apologized not for murder, no, for failing to keep his little brother safe from himself. Blair never opened a single envelope. She knew the past couldn't be changed. One could only move on, keeping the memory of those few months of absolute happiness when she was finally herself, loved and free. The bell above the store door still jingled, welcoming visitors. Blair laid out the new comic books, Whitney checked the accounts, and life went on, imperfect, complicated, but real. Just as Grayson Thorpe had intended it to be, the man who taught the small town that love didn't need explanations or excuses.